All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Lookout. Doing a report this morning on what happened yesterday on the McKinney Fire and the Yeti Fire up in Siskiyou County. Going to look at an animation here from last 12 hours on the Fort Jones camera. So you can see yesterday afternoon, evening, a lot of smoke coming out of the west side of the fire. One thing that's interesting to me here is you can see a lot of smoke in the background coming from the Yeti Fire. And so we talked a little bit about that. There's some, a little bit of heat on the top of the hill there backing down. And talked a little yesterday about how Yeti has the potential to put up smoke that affects fire behavior on McKinney. Right now we've got, the storms are kind of past and we're getting back to a little bit more of a normal pattern. There is hotter and drier weather forecast and some weather movement that's could lead to some stronger onshore winds. So I'm not a meteorologist, but there's some good people you can follow that will, like Holt Hanley, give you an idea about how the weather's going to affect these fires. In general, hotter and drier. Love the webcams. Jumping over to our maps. I'm going to start with the Yeti Fire. So Yeti was pretty active yesterday. Just wanted to point out here, one thing we talked about yesterday is that the Yeti Fire is surrounded by other fires that have burned in the last decade. So you've got the 2020 Slater Fire, 2017 Cedar Fire, and 2012 Goff Fire out here. And then the big one really is 2014 Happy Camp Complex, or the Frying Pan Fire was this big part of the complex. So what does that mean? Each one of these fire scars is going to it's going to burn a little differently. As we're seeing on McKinney, we are getting active fire spread in the 2014 Beaver Fire, but it's slower and it's been a little easier to control. There's still some active portions there, but for the most part, they've got line in that part. So Goff Fire, haven't been out there on the ground, but unlike the Beaver Fire, which was kind of on a lot of industrial timberland managed by private companies and then heavily managed after the fire, Goff hasn't really had a lot done on it since the fire. So that's definitely one of the places that, the fire's backing slowly down to 96 or to the Klamath River here. And hopefully it doesn't cross over and get on these south-facing slopes, because we know that south-facing slopes get a lot of sun, and here it's going to also get the afternoon up canyon winds. And so if it does cross into this scar, we know we've got a lot of 10-year-old dead and down material, fine fuels. Fires like to create openings by killing trees. Openings create opportunity for light and more grass and more brush. So if the fire does cross into the Goff Fire, likely it's going to make a good run. Up in the Red Buttes wilderness here, you can see that the top of the ridges, there's not a lot of fuel there. So oftentimes these landscapes, you can see the perimeter of the 2012 Goff Fire, and there's kind of always usually a reason that a fire stops where it does. Either we had good access for suppression, or we had a break in fuels. Here, just the fire basically hit a lot of rock. So this landscape has a lot of that, kind of barrier when we look at 2017 Abney Fire, 2017 Cedar Fire, 2016 Gap Fire, 2020 Slater Fire, 2014. So part of the story. Back to the fire itself. Night before last, this white line is where the fire was. So this white line is about 25 hours of growth on the fire. The bluish line here is where fire risk flew the fire yesterday at noon. And so you can see that the fire, we talked about yesterday at noon, hey, we're going to get up canyon winds. They're going to blow the fire up this ridge. Then it'll back down the other side. So that's happening. Other thing we talked about yesterday on this fire was crews. It looked like at noon from this blue line had lit firing operation off this road and put a little heat out here as the start of it going farther out. Looks like that firing operation by midnight last night had held, not midnight, actually about 9:30 p.m., had held. And it was kind of backing down here. Like we said, these firing operations are designed because we know this fire is backing down into here and can expect, hey, it's going to get established and tomorrow it'll run out of here. So that's, one thing that our ops people are doing, and also the fire behavior people are they're looking at, hey, that's why we want to know where the fire might be 24 hours out is, hey, if it's going to be out here 24 hours from now, we should probably be working on staffing a firing show out this ridge, or getting a dozer. So that's what they're doing here with that firing, is trying to keep ahead of it. Like we said yesterday, you don't always get to put fire on the ground when you want to, like in August. So some of the fire they put on the ground yesterday slopped over anyway. So likely, it's not unlikely this is going to back down and reverse slope here. A lot of it depends on, what the tactics are here. There's a road down below here, but as we've talked about, on the steep ground, mid-slope roads are really tough to hold, lots of rollout. Just because there's a road that shows up here too doesn't mean that it's maintained. So not unlikely this fire is going to back down and come back up the other side, which kind of begs the question of, why we fight fire where we do in the first place. In the big picture, yeah, this fire is probably going to hit this area here and really just be cleaning up an 8-year-old burn, but there's homesteads out here, and so they're going to do everything they can to protect these homesteads, but when it comes down to it, fires out here kind of do what they want to do. So on the other side here, backing down, not a lot of spread. We were talking about yesterday how we might expect this to be taken in a run at night, just because that's when we get down canyon winds. We're coming over here into West Grider Creek, where the fire made a pretty good run yesterday. So this blue line here again is where the fire was at noon, and then the red is where the fire was out to in the evening. 9 p.m. There's a road system here. Seeing as the fire's buttoned right up onto the road, seems likely that that's firing. But I don't have any first-hand intel. But that would be my guess, is not that the fire just kind of gently banged up into there and didn't cross the road. So this is likely a firing operation on this flank here. Ties in all the way up. And we talked about that a couple days ago, just that roads are our first option for controlling fire, but they're not always in the best location for, tactical value. They're mid-slope, or they're in a place where, they go through a gully that, is going to carry fire up. Anyway, nice thing about having all this infrared is just what I'm finding now more and more is it's great down the road if you're going to sit down with someone who actually was making the calls on this fire, to do some storytelling and ask them, hey, how did that go? How did that work out? When did you decide to use that road, etc.? So it's pretty cool stuff. That's the Yeti. Hoping to get some intel from some friends over there. We'll keep you posted on that. Back over to McKinney. There's some new infrared for this Alex fire. Didn't show any growth. McKinney's had a lot of action, as we showed you in that video to start off. There's been a lot of work getting done out here. Like I said yesterday, dozer operators are more focused on pushing dirt than pushing a pencil, but someone got a pencil, and there's a lot of new line mapped. So starting off with the fire, we're just going to do our normal kind of tour around there. The biggest growth was the fire backing down into Mill Creek, a little bit of back down into Horse Creek. It made a decent little run here up into the Beaver Fire Scar, where it's still fairly active. But I'm going to jump to an ops map right now, and we'll look a little at what's getting done on the control side. Okay, so this is the south end of the fire. And we talked the other day a little bit about, how we have to tie hand lines to roads and dozer lines and kind of just piece together our way across the landscape. So here on the south side of Indian Creek Bolly, we've got, they're calling it contained here, coming up out of Humbug Creek. That black means they're not worried about that section anymore. Little hand line, then there's dozer line here. Kind of indirect dozer line on the road. All the way around, there's hand line in some of this high country. Tied a road to a dozer line, more dozer line, hand line, dozer line, hand line. So these are some of the spots we were looking at last couple of days. Looks like they're showing kind of indirect hand line around those. But those haven't actually moved that much either. One thing we talked about on an earlier fire this year is burnouts, and how oftentimes, here's some steep country coming down off the kind of the headwaters of, looks like Barkhouse Creek. Along this kind of ridge here, you've got dozer line. But oftentimes, even if it's, if you've only got a few firefighters and there's a finger of fire going somewhere, and you have the option that, hey, I can cut 400 feet of hand line and fire this out, or I can cut a mile of hand line. Oftentimes when we talk about burnouts or indirect, it's just a matter of resources. If you need 5 shot crews to go around this, or you need 1 crew to go across here, you could probably use those 4 other crews somewhere else. So, firing operations aren't always large. Sometimes it's just like, hey, there's a little finger here that's 10 acres. Let's cut, 100 yards of line and fire it. Here we're tied into roads, come around, and then there's dozer line kind of around the head of the right shoulder of Mill Creek. So we'll jump back into the 3D map to see where that all is happening. So the portion that they're calling contained, I'm thinking is in here. This is, yellow shows areas that are cooling off. And then these are the spots we were talking about with the indirect hand line. This is the ridge where we showed the dozer line cutting off the finger. And we have dozer line out around here. I'm not sure why this red line's just floating there in space, but shouldn't be doing that. Anyway, so there's dozer line around this, which is kind of what we talked about, the upper shoulder of Mill Creek. So dozer line kind of wraps around here to where they can't get any farther down. So this white line here is 24 hours of fire growth. So once again, the fire is continuing to back down into the head of Mill Creek there, as it has been. If it hasn't already slopped over and started going up the slope, it's close. There's dozer line in here that comes down a ways, but they don't show it coming all the way down. So that's going to continue to be active in there, not great access. And there's dozer line down the ridge on this side now. We'll see what happens, if we start getting kind of slope reversals down in here. This is a high priority. Last night, saw some reports that the air attack was calling up like every heavy air tanker on the West Coast, basically, to come work on this part of the fire. Only other part of the west flank that's active here really is, has moved much, is this area that's continuing to back over the last 3 or 4 days, kind of to the east of Horse Creek. So now we're coming around and looking up into the 2014 Beaver Scar with Highway 96 running across the middle here. And there's some new growth here yesterday Fire made a pretty decent run. The white line is 24 hours ago, and the fire made a pretty decent run here and kind of up to the slope break. It's still in, you can see underneath that, it's still in this area that was clear cut after the last fire and sprayed and planted. And it looks like it's kind of bumped up into areas that weren't salvaged. So it'd be interesting to see, what happens here if they're going direct, and what's the difference of, fire spread in this kind of, you can really see the stark contrast here between lands that have been salvage logged, site prepped, meaning they, take a lot of the brush out, sprayed, piled all the, slash from the logs and everything. So when we talk about checkerboard ownership, you really see the effects there, and it'll be interesting to see what the fire effects are. Anyway, this is active yesterday. We'll see what happens today. For the rest of the McKinney, moving off here to the east, there's not really, I don't see, except for a couple little teeny spots here that may just even be like mapping errors, like right in here. Don't see a lot of change there in the perimeter. There's a combination of hand line, dozer line, pretty deep into here. And you can see that the IR, is showing no heat at all, really. The little red dots are like stump holes or burning down logs. Yellow still got what we call scattered heat. But these areas are really cold. So a lot of work done in there. So that's the story of last few days on the fires. There's a ton of work going on. And the fire's going to keep pushing in these remote areas where you still see the red. And some of those areas, there's just not a lot we can do with direct attack or, bulldozers, which are our main tools. As the fire behavior analyst pointed out yesterday, is smoke really does affect fire behavior. And these areas, the smoke lifts out because they're exposed to the kind of prevailing up canyon westerlies. And so they're the most that's one of the reasons that they're most active, is they're drawing out quicker after the rain because they got more wind, they got less smoke shading. But also this Yeti Fire, depending on where the wind's coming from, might be pouring some smoke onto the western edge of this fire. One other thing I want to talk about a little is fire severity. Here's a map of the Slater Fire and the Happy Camp complex. There's other fires in here that have burned recently, but I didn't have time to really call up and mess with that data. There's a program called QGIS. These are soil burn severity maps made from satellite information. So green is low soil burn severity. Yellow means there's impacts to the soil from the fire, but there's still some organic material present, and that helps kind of prevent erosion, and it helps, generally it means that the whole landscape's not just kind of white ash. Red is high soil burn severity. So it's interesting in this timber country, this isn't necessarily a fire severity map. This is just what like hydrologists and soil scientists are using after fire to look at potential for landslides and erosion and everything else. But what's interesting about some of this is that, we've got some imagery kind of post-fire, and you see that even though this entire landscape is burned, there's really definitely a mosaic. There was areas that burned really hot. There's areas that burned where there's still a lot of standing tall dead trees. And a lot of that is a function of when the fire burned. Like, a fire like the Happy Camp complex that burns for, a month. It's burning on wet days, it's burning on dry days, it's burning on smoky days, it's burning on a hot day with no smoke. And we end up with this real pattern on the landscape. So, we'll see the same thing with the Yeti. Is there's going to be times tomorrow where the fire, or even today, where the fire is kind of aligned with slope, it backs down to the bottom of a canyon at the, a lot of it just is a function of like, hey, what time, if this fire gets to the bottom of the hill down in here and wants to make a run up the slope, when does that happen? If that happens at 4 in the afternoon, right as the up canyon wind kicks up, then we're going to see kind of a severe fire, and a lot of these trees are going to get killed. But if it happens at 3 in the morning and it right before a week of cool weather with smoke lying in under an inversion, then we'll see a lot different fire effects. So it's important in this country to remember that this is what we call a mixed severity fire regime. And yesterday I made a comment about how the fire backing down the highway was good fire. I'm sure it doesn't feel like good fire if you live on the other side of the highway, or if you're worried about it getting into the Goff fire and burning up Syed Valley. So as I wanted to say again, is just that, this kind of good fire, bad fire, it's not necessarily a political thing or well, yeah, it's not political, right? It's just it's physics and it's ecology, and we've had lightning fires started in this landscape and human-caused fires in this landscape for thousands of years, and just because we've got a kind of a hysterical and fear-based response to fire at this point, and rightfully so for a lot of us who've been traumatized by fire. That doesn't mean that lightning fires in the Klamath in August are ecological wreckage, or that because we're in an era of climate change that everything's out the window and this fire is only destructive. So there's going to be areas in this fire that burn hot. There's going to be areas we've already seen that burn cool, and that's nature. Lightning fires are started by God, right? And so there you go. Enough of that. Thanks for following the lookout, and we'll keep watching.